Good evening, everyone. Let's begin our evening with a prayer. Divine Mother,
Divine Mother,
Heavenly Father,
Heavenly Father,
friend, beloved God,
friend, beloved God,
Jesus Christ,
Jesus Christ,
Babaji Krishna,
Babaji Krishna,
Lahiri Mahashaya,
Lahiri Mahashaya,
Swami Shri Yukteswar,
Swami Shri Yukteswar,
and our beloved Guru,
and our beloved Guru,
Paramhansa Yogananda,
Paramahansa Yogananda,
saints of all religions.
saints of all religions.
We lay the flowers of our devotion
We lay the flowers of our devotion
humbly at thy feet.
humbly at thy feet.
Divine Mother,
Divine Mother,
wrap us up in your arms,
wrap us up in your arms,
that we may feel your loving presence,
that we may feel your loving presence,
dissolving every trace of ego.
dissolving every trace of ego.
Help us to be channels of your light,
Help us to be channels of your light,
shining love in all places of darkness,
shining love in all places of darkness,
that we may sing your song,
that we may sing your song,
whisper your words,
whisper your words,
and share your vibration.
and share your vibration.
Om.
Om.
Peace.
Peace.
Amen.
Amen.
You fill my heart with music. I dance through life with thee. I sing your song in sorrows gone. In joy I live ever free. You fill my heart with music. I dance through life with thee. I sing your song in sorrows gone. In joy I live ever free. You fill my heart with music. I dance through life with thee. I sing your song in sorrows gone. In joy I live ever free. You fill my heart with music. I dance through life with thee. I sing your song in sorrows gone. In joy I live ever free. You fill my heart with music. I dance through life with thee. I sing your song in sorrows gone. In joy I live ever free. You fill my heart with music. I dance through life with thee. I sing your song in sorrows gone. In joy I live ever free. You fill my heart with music. I dance through life with thee. I sing your song in sorrows gone. In joy I live ever free. You fill my heart with music. I dance through life with thee.
We good? Am I on? Yes? Good. What would I do without you, Jyoti? She's been my main person both last night and today. This is an interesting reading tonight. I was telling Sai Ganesh and Lakshmi, both who are here in the temple with me, that when I went to look up this word in our Ananda library, and I've mentioned you so many times now, there's never a talk on the topic, but there's always a reference to the word, whether it's depression or anxiety or whatever the word is. You can just sort of get kick-started a little bit, one can, if one's going to give a talk on these things, which of course I've been doing. But first I put in irritation, which is the subject of our talk tonight. Actually, the subject of our talk is overcoming irritation. Nothing except some irritation that could be caused by magnesium. There was one reference to it. Your bowels could be irritated by magnesium. That was not going to be very helpful. Then I tried other words like angst. I tried a couple, nothing. So I said, okay, this is supposed to come I got to really reach to Master and Swamiji for this. I meditated, but I did not think about it very much. So let's see what happens here. But just as I was meditating, I was thinking about, let me just recall the thought about, I lost what came to me. It'll come back to me. Something about this. Oh, I know what it was. Yeah, this is important. Last night, we started the first of a 3-class series that was focusing on the topic, how do we inspire our meditation practice and keep it inspired? And the idea came to me to do that 3-part class, primarily because I ran out of time when I gave my talk at SRW, and I wanted to say everything that I had planned on saying. And I got exactly 1/3 of the way through it. My time was up. It was just poor planning on my fault. I knew I had 20 minutes, and I planned an hour-long talk, so that's what happens. So anyway, we had another class planned, but I came back and said, can we change it? And the talk divided into 3 parts. Last night was mostly about seva or serving. And then the next 2 weeks will be about right attitude and then attunement and grace. Now, these are probably about 4 of the most commonly heard words on our path. Right from the beginning, right from Raja Yoga or Med 1 or wherever any of us started. And I realized when I went home last night, I didn't get any feedback about the talk. I have no idea how anybody felt. It was rather well attended, but I don't know what other people thought about it, which is just fine. But I actually loved the class, not the talk, but the class, because the class also included discussion, so everybody had an opportunity to be involved. But somehow the evening, which was an hour and a half, but it felt simple, but not easy. It felt uplifted, but required energy. It felt absolutely basic, and yet those basic principles on the spiritual path that we can revisit, and we do revisit them over and over and over. And yet they are not only ever new, which is, of course, part of Yogananda's definition of Satchitananda, ever existent, ever conscious, ever new bliss. So that idea that in every instant There's a new experience to be had if we're in the moment, if we can stay in what is less than a moment, really, but right here and here and here. It's a very interesting and deep concept that one could never get bored on the path, just like one could never get bored thinking about those very simple seva, right attitude, attunement, grace. There's a few more of them, of course, energy, willpower. I could have spoken about anything, but that's what we're talking about, because that's what came to me about inspiring my practice, were those three areas that I could speak to. But when I went home last night, I asked myself, again, I was perfectly happy with the evening. I felt inspired by it. I felt kind of buoyed up by it. But it was so simple. And I thought, did I remember to say to people this, just this? Like, this is so simple. If you're not careful, you could miss the depth of it, because our minds work like that. It's easy to say, oh, I know all about seva. Of course, that's the way to get yourself onto the spiritual path. It's a good thing to do. It opens your heart. There's a lot we could say about it. And in the doing of that, we write off the depth of the meaning of it. And that's true about right attitude. And it's true, attunement is not necessarily such a simple or easy concept, but we've heard it so much that if you've been on this path for 10 or 20 or 50 years, you could stop listening, stop taking it in when you hear those words, which is a big mistake. It's a big mistake for any of us, because in each moment of our lives, certainly in each month or year, we have the opportunity to look at all of those simple spiritual principles in yet a new way, because we're moving, we're changing, we're deepening, we're expanding. And that came to mind just now. But what also came to mind is that 52 weeks out of the year, we do a reading on Sundays at our Sunday service. Most of you know that. And then we repeat it. And for years, we've been repeating it. We do the same talk on just about the same week every year. And sometimes it just happens that for 3 or 4 years in a row, we come up with, we get that talk. So I haven't looked this year, I don't know, but every once in a while I think, gee, I just gave this talk last year. But it's never the same talk. It never would be the same talk. It's a mistake to hold on to notes or to go back and look at that talk last year, because it keeps you stagnant. It takes you back instead of allowing you to expand or look at a topic anew. So whatever the topic is, it doesn't matter. Whatever the reading is, each year there's some other perspective on it, some other depth of knowing, some other experience that's happened. So no matter how simple the concepts on our path, they're always based on deep spiritual principles that we can always look at, again, anew and anew and anew with fresh vision. So why am I saying all that, or why did it come to me tonight? Because the reading tonight, which I'm going to read to you now, which is on irritation, which is very interesting. This is a little aside. I was just over in our book and gift shop, and I was standing at the front desk talking to Ananda Prem and Edna. They've been working in there all day. And out of the corner of my eye, I see a light flashing. And I realize it's a light bulb that's been off. I've watched it for a month, 2 months, 3 months, I don't remember. I've mentioned it to people. It's not going to be my job to climb up there on a ladder and do it, but I've mentioned it to certain people several times. That light's not working. It's one of those fancy kinds of, not neon, but I forget what they are, but some kind of fancy light that'll just blink when it's sort of dead or dying. This has either been dead or dying for a long time. And I've mentioned it more than once. And I was saying to Ananda Prem and Edna, but I have been telling people just like that. And then I looked at my watch. I said, I need to go. I have to go give a talk on the secret of dealing with irritation. I was very irritated. Anyway, I laughed and I was no longer irritated. So that's one of the secrets, laughter. Anyway, the reason that this whole, I think, concept just came to me while I was meditating, excuse me for 1 minute, I do not have a watch and I can't see that clock and I have no idea what time it is anywhere, so lest I keep you here all night, I'm going to get a little clock. Thank you, Lakshmi. Let me see if I can actually see that. You know what? I'll take it right up here. Thank you. Let me do the reading with you, and then I'll tell you where I went with this. Swamiji writes, the secret of overcoming irritation is to view life in terms of its longer rhythms, not the fleeting ripples of pleasure and pain. Fleeting ripples is important there, pleasure, pain's important there, but the broad waves of long-term loyalties, and not emotional commitments merely, but the great swells of dedication to high aims in life. It's a very beautiful reading, actually. I'm going to read it one more time. It says, the secret of overcoming irritation is to view life in terms of its longer rhythms, not the fleeting ripples of pleasure and pain, but the broad waves of long-term loyalties, and not emotional commitments merely, Swamiji says, but the great swells of dedication to high aims in life. So Swamiji's saying here that if you just stay focused too much in the moment, and particularly if you are emotional, and you're looking now and now and now from a place of emotion, I mean, in essence, he's saying it's going to be pretty darn irritating. And it is. And he's saying, look at the broader picture. Look at the possibility of where we're going. Look at something that is much deeper than emotion, what he calls great swells of dedication to high aims in life. So he's saying, make yourself more expansive, and then that little thing that you were focusing on will be much less irritating. One of the images that came to me years ago, just right in the middle of a talk, but it's a great image, so it's useful to repeat it, is that I said to people, if you were in New York City at 5th and Madison, and you lived on the first floor of an apartment building, and you looked out your window every day at 12 noon, what would you see? Well, for anybody who's been in New York City, you see throngs of people. They're all in a hurry. they really, people, I mean, New York's sort of known, maybe it's changed, I haven't been there now in about 5 years, I doubt it's changed much, but people don't smile a lot in the middle of the city as they're going. People are always in a hurry, they're headed somewhere, they have that very, I think the word is officious sense about them. I think that's the right word. And there's thousands of taxis within a few blocks, and they're all honking their horns constantly. It's about as noisy as it is in Delhi. I mean, it just is like that. It doesn't get worse than what it is in New York City at 12 noon. So if you live on the first floor of that apartment, if you're right in it, right in that moment, it's irritating, it's a lot of negative energy, it's loud, it's everything that we would probably not want our world to be. Now, if we take ourselves up to the 35th or the 40th floor, or the 25th floor for that matter, and that's in that same building, and you look out the window at 12 noon, depending on where you're looking, you could see the Hudson River, you could see the Statue of Liberty, you could see the other river, which I forget what the name of it is. You could see the park. I mean, you hear nothing. So nothing's changed. Absolutely nothing has changed except how you're looking at it. Nothing's changed except your perspective. And that is just so important. It just speaks right to the essence of the spiritual path. And part of why it came to me when I was just meditating before about the simple truths that we revisit all the time and that they're always new. It was so subtle, I'm trying to hold on to it. It's like grasping a cloud, but I knew it was meaningful when it came. It's because all of us have heard so many times about energy in the astral spine. And we've heard that the whole point of meditation and the whole point of the spiritual path, it's so simple in a way. You draw energy in, you focus it, you create a magnetism in your spine. This is really what Kriya does. It draws all of the energy in, which focuses it and gives it a lot more strength and power. And we keep this magnetic draw at the point between the eyebrows or focusing on the guru. And we draw that energy up. And we know that anything that takes us up, anything that draws that energy in and helps us raise it, really feels good. It's not irritating. And anything, when energy is running helter-skelter and we have no control over it, and it's just bombarding against other molecules of energy, making no sense other than wreaking havoc in our chakras, it's irritating. It's downward pulling. We call it all of these words, that which is contractive, that which is negative, that which is dark, that which is down. Whatever word we use for it, we've all been learning these things and repeating them for years and years and years. And yet, here we come to a reading that says, remember that. Remember not to be emotional. Don't let that energy go helter-skelter in the heart chakra. Draw it in. Big devotional swells, Swamiji writes. That's all the difference in the heart chakra. Emotion, irritating, devotion, calming. It gets back to every basic principle that we know. Up, in, and up is not irritating. Out and down, very irritating. Whatever it is in life, we have these basic principles to go back to. It always comes back to the most simple of these truths. And that's exactly the way it is with irritation. Everything that irritates us basically because we want something to be different than what it is. If we don't want something to be different than what it is, we're not irritated by it. We can look at the most difficult experience, occasion, event. If we're not attached to it or hooked on it or had some preconceived notion of how it was meant to be, we would never be irritated. This is one of the basic principles. I think I alluded to this last night, but I could be having a déjà vu. In relationships, it's the most common thing in the world. I have said it to myself, first of all, if I get honest. Myself probably most of these times. But I bet I've said it 1,000 times in my life. You're only upset because you think things should be different than how they are. You're only upset with a person because you think they should be different than how they are. That the world should be giving you something different than what it is. And that's never the case. Or, I mean, it's just never the case. It can't be the case because exactly what we're being greeted with, what we're being shown, exactly that is precisely perfect. But we run around in this emotional and somewhat delusional state, thinking if things were different, we'd be happier. Again, I'm not saying anything to any of you that you haven't heard again and again. And yet when you think about how often in a day, you have little feelings of irritation, just imagine that you could stop yourself and say, what if I didn't need things to be different? You know, somebody was just telling me, so I'm quoting something that I haven't read, but whoever it was a reliable source. So I'm going to quote it, and I hope it's accurate, but they were telling me that Master, at one point, Yogananda, went to Mexico, and that he was actually thinking of not coming back to the United States. I've not read this way myself, but that he was sort of like, all of these people I'm being sued, people want money from me, they want a lot from me, they're just whatever he was coming up against. But they said that what was written about him, he was thinking maybe he wouldn't come back here. I never remember hearing that. But what they added is that there was no upset in him, that somebody in Mexico was saying there was no upset in him. He was just sort of calmly deciding, gee, do I want to go back to the US or not? I mean, after starting to build a pretty big work here, do I want to go back there? I don't know, let me think about it. How many of us just walk away from things that have meant that so much to us? I also remember, and this I do think came up in somebody's talk at Spiritual Renewal Week, where they were saying, look at everything that Swami Kriyananda manifested. I mean, so much of what he did, books, music, communities, design work for buildings, for temples. I mean, just look around you. It's extraordinary. We could probably make lists of 100 things long. I mean, the way we design our altars, the colors, just everything came through Swamiji. And yet, repeatedly, he absolutely picked up and just left it. He left. He would leave. I mean, he moved to Italy at one point, leaving the village in crystal clarity, not knowing if or when he'd be back. I think after that, he did come back a few times, but eventually he didn't. He moved to India at one point, ready to leave everything in America, everything in Italy. There was no sense that anything was supposed to stay as it was, or that he needed to hold on, or that there was a particular way things were supposed to be, other than the fact that he lived perfectly by spiritual principle. That you could not move him off of. But otherwise, the things in the world, the attitudes of people, the calmness with which that man went through 12 years of horrible lawsuit trials, really without ever feeling or communicating in an agitated way that things should be different. I myself, I was not one of the people who helped start Ananda Village. I feel like I had a close relationship with Swamiji, but I didn't spend that much time with him. It was just deep time, meaningful time when we were together, but it was not a lot of time, particularly in the early years. But let me just come back. I just lost that. I wanted to make a point about something that I myself noticed about him. I lost it. It'll come back if it's important. It just left. But this quality of his, of not thinking that, oh, I know what it was. I happened to be with Swamiji when he was very sick down in Los Angeles. I don't know how many years before he died this was, but maybe 5 to 7 years before. I can't remember exactly. I know that Dayamata was still alive because there was this, he was not at war with anybody or anything, but he felt a lot of the negative energy in Los Angeles. But I was with him for a series of days in a row. I don't know, again, how many days. But each day we would talk about a lot of what was happening with SRF, with Dayamata, with him. And he would tell me in the most perfectly calm voice and with totally calm energy about this untenable situation that was happening between them energetically, but never with the sense of that he wasn't at war with it. He wasn't fighting with it. There wasn't a sense of this should be different than what it is. There was simply the, oh, look at this. This is what's happening. There was a fluidity. There was a way of just working with it, noticing it, being with it. No irritation. That is pretty remarkable. I remember years ago when I first met Swami Satchitananda, he was the first Indian saint that I ever met, so it was quite the meeting. He looked like the pictures look, orange robes, white beard, down to here. You probably can't see me, but it was long white hair, total twinkle in his eyes. For any of you who knew him, he was utterly charming. And he used to speak in puns all the time. He was very clever like that. And I heard him speak, and he mentioned us that he was going to be giving a workshop that weekend. So I just said to my husband, I'm going to that workshop. My husband got very rational on me, but honey, you have to work, you have this. I said, I don't care. It can all wait. I'm going to be with this man. I knew I needed to be with him. So we go to this workshop, having moved our whole lives aside, and we're sitting there. It was in San Diego. And an hour passes, and 2 hours pass, and his disciples get up and they talk, but they were not Swami Satchitananda. They were, people like me talking. It was not the Swami. And all of us were getting we were just sinking. So much disappointment. We were so disappointed and we were irritated. Where was this man? He told us he would be here at a certain time. He walks in over 4 hours late, and part of this is irrelevant, but I have to share it with you. His disciples had created up on this series, it was a dais, then a few steps up, this huge chair, and they had decorated it like the most important Swami in India was coming to something in India. I never before, never since saw anything like it in the United States. I don't know how many flowers and leis and colors, and it was gorgeous. And he walks in and he takes a look at this chair and he says to somebody, he motions for them to bring him over a folding chair. And he sits down on the folding chair. And the first thing he does is he looks at us, with that little Indian head swivel like this, something's coming. He says, "Were you disappointed?" We all go, "Yes, Swamiji, we were," like that was the right answer. He goes, "If you make no appointments, you will have no disappointments." And I love that. And the next thing he said, hold that thought, because that's about irritation. That's exactly what it is. Whenever we have an expectation, I want to finish that story, but I'm going to cut into that story for a minute. That's what Sri Yukteswar said to Yogananda. Yogananda convinces himself that Sri Yukteswar is giving him permission to go into the Himalayas to try and have an experience of samadhi. I mean, it was absurd. He was with his guru, who is a true master. And when he's gone for days, if you may or may not know the story, if you don't read it in AY, it's charming. He's given wrong directions, he gets sent the wrong way here, he's everywhere. Finally, he meets a great saint who says, "Of course I'm not going to give you samadhi, that's for your guru to do." Very sweetly, he says to him, "Go home." So Yogananda sheepishly walks in, and Sri Yukteswar looks at him and says, "Oh, you're back, come on, let's go eat." And Yogananda says, "You're not angry with me?" He said, "How could I be angry with you? I have no expectations of you." It's phenomenal when you hear it. No expectations, no anger. No expectations, no irritation. There's a very important lesson there for all of us, but I just want to finish my previous story. I didn't forget. So about 30 minutes into this fabulous talk that Swami Satchidananda is giving from this folding chair, an uncomfortable metal folded chair, suddenly he looks up at this exquisite chair that they've created, and he says to us, "You see that?" He said, "That is a throne." He says, "You know what happens if you step onto a throne? Just like that." He says, "There's a big risk of being dethroned." And he never sat in that chair. And his disciples got a big lesson in no expectation. They had probably spent hours and hours preparing that space for him, and he wouldn't sit in it. It was just so charming, and two extraordinary lessons. I was like, I don't know, 28 years old or something. Somebody else do the math for me. It was a lot of years ago, 45 years ago. And I remember them because they're important. They're truth. You make no appointments, you'll have no disappointments. How could I be angry with you? I have no expectation of you. And this is the whole point of this reading about the secret to overcoming irritation. Go through the world knowing that you're doing your very best to make things manifest as you would like them to manifest. from your highest place and be prepared in every moment to accept what comes, because never, ever, not once, not in a moment, can it ever happen that what's come to you isn't a gift from God for you to move closer towards your highest potential. That's just the way life is. What's happening now? How can I grow through it? How can I continuously meet, look at, and use as grist for our spiritual mills everything that comes to us? Then we meet every situation with great joy. Now, don't ask me how I'm going to do this with the light outside of the teaching center, because I'm still pretty convinced that light bulb should be changed, but we'll see. Doesn't really mean I don't have to be that I have to be irritated about it. Of course I don't have to be. I can just mention again and say, let's have the light changed by the end of next week. Or if there's a problem, let's talk about it. There's different ways of being with something that simple to, honestly, the most serious, life-changing disappointments, losses, whatever they are, because they're going to happen. How could they not happen? There would be no growth for our souls. There would be no growth if we couldn't run into issues. I remember in this, there's a book that I've loved. It's interesting, I haven't read it now for a few years. I used to pick it up, open it up, and read some part of it before any talk that I ever gave, certainly long before I came to Ananda, when I used to give a lot of talks, sort of self-motivational kind of speaking. And the book was called The Miracle of Change. And it's a wonderful book, a really important book. But every chapter it starts with a wonderful quote, the kind of quotes that you always wish you could bring to mind. They're filled with them too, but the one at the beginning of each chapter is always great. And one of them said something like, why people resist change. I don't remember how it starts, but it says change means motion, and motion means friction. And it's so right. So we have a lot of friction in our lives in that sense of movement, anywhere we're going to go to move. But why don't we expect that? Why don't we know that that's what's going to come and prepare ourselves to greet each moment in life with calmness, with a sense of deep inner peace, with total, not just acceptance, but to work our way towards a kind of a feeling of gratitude for being given each opportunity to go deeper into that astral spine, that river of calmness, that river that is peace. That's our goal. That's the whole goal of meditation, certainly of Kriya Yoga, is to just find our way and then to float effortlessly on that river into this, what did Aditya call it during SRW? Now, beautiful, beautiful. I'm going to bring it to you next time, because I don't want to just tease you with it. But anyway, that is the goal, that beautiful flow that, as Master said about change and about spiritual growth, it's very difficult at first, and then it becomes effortless. Master says that. He says it more beautifully than I just said it, but the whole point is, at a certain point, the energy just moves itself. All we have to do is keep moving in that direction as often as we need to until we feel that effortlessness that carries us right to the point between the eyebrows, right to that state of deep inner communion with God. I think Aditya called it boundless, breathless communion with the Lord. It was a beautiful saying that he had, like that, boundless, breathless communion. That's where we're all headed. We just have to change our minds, change our attitude, change our expectations, and that's what's waiting for us. Oh, 3 minutes. I never even looked at the clock. So, let me put my glasses on so I can look and see who's here. Now I see you all. Great souls. Anybody have any comments or questions before we end tonight? Just raise your hand or unmute yourself. Yeah, Evelyn.
So I'm curious, how do we face our everyday at work? We have goals that we have to achieve, and how can we approach it from that place of not being attached to it or not having a particular expectation, yet fulfilling our daily tasks? How do we balance that?
You know, I'm not sure. I didn't tell you there's probably many ways to answer that question, Evelyn, but I think if we don't look at it as a balance, but as exactly what we're doing. You remember, because Evelyn was in the class last night and we were talking about seva, and I told the story of a friend of mine who had started a new job. It was very different kind of work for her, and it was very hard for her to be learning it, and it was demanding on the clock in a different way than she was used to. She had come through work before, serving before, that was much more free-flowing, and she was really running into, whoa, this is what's being asked of me. It felt huge to her. And we were talking about how she could be there. Really, I mean, in a way, what you're asking, you're saying, how do we balance it? But she was saying, how do I make this work? And it took me a while. We were together for at least an hour till I thought to myself and said to her, there's only one answer here. And I think that's really true. As long as she saw that work as work, she was always going to be struggling with meeting deadlines, with having more work to do than she felt she could do, with feeling like the work was too hard at times, just in moments. But as soon as she could change her mind and see work as service, so that's the first step, that we're serving each person or situation that we come into being with. That's the first thing. And then for those of us on a spiritual path, the more we can remember to practice seeing God there, as if we're actually in that moment treating Swami Kriyananda or Master or whoever we want that to be, some great saint or somebody dear to us, where our hearts are open. It's really fascinating how repeatedly deadlines get met, and they get met with much more joy than we could have known in any other way. And if they don't get met, if you can't meet them, there's an ease to that. But you don't always feel like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. It's like, who do I get to serve now? What do I get to serve? You know, we're all human beings. So it's not like, that's not going to be effortless. But it is a really good place to start. It may be the only place to start, is to remember that everything we're doing is service. Everything. Swamiji says it so clearly, and I just happened to have it kind of nearly memorized because it was so much a part of my talk at SRW, though I didn't ever say this phrase. I wanted to. And where Swamiji said, as much as possible, see every situation that comes to you as a gift, as a direct gift from God to help you make spiritual progress and achieve your highest spiritual potential. He doesn't say occasionally think that way or sometimes. Every situation, he says, every situation. His words were chosen very carefully. So that is where we all need to start. And many of you have heard me say this. When I went through medical training, it was challenging in many ways. It was very hard work. People's lives were often really, truly on the line. And there wasn't like there was always help right next to you. If you got into trouble, you had to page somebody, you had to wait for them to answer, you had to hope they answered. You were never really in trouble, but the patient was. You were exhausted. There were no laws about medical training when I went through training. They could keep you up. They could insist that you stayed up as long as they wanted to. And there were many times where I was up 72 straight hours doing things where people's lives depended on it. It wasn't until somebody got the brilliant idea to start seeing how many mistakes were made under those circumstances that they created laws against that. But those laws didn't exist yet when I was in training. And you know, I always wore a lab coat in training, almost everybody did, because you needed to have so much paraphernalia with you. I mean, stethoscopes, charts, all these little pocketbooks that you could look up things. You know, the internet wasn't what it was now. Nobody had a cell phone. I don't think they existed yet. Like that. You know, it was like prehistoric times. But I lived it. It was real. And I just put everywhere in each pocket on my clipboard as many places as I could have it. Stop. Ask God to walk into the room with you. Stop. Ask God to help you come up with the diagnosis. Ask God for more energy right now. Constantly reminding myself until more and more and more. And believe me, I am unfortunately far from perfect, but I'm way better than I was then about remembering it's always God. It's always God serving God. It's always God working through us. We don't have to come up with the energy. We don't have to come up with all the right answers. If we can open ourselves up to that flow of grace, we find that we know things that we couldn't possibly have known with this little mind. Honestly, I want to write a book about how many times in my life that has happened to me, just like me. If it happened to me, it could happen to everybody. Things that I couldn't have known, I suddenly knew God's grace. And that's what we're looking for. And that's how we make it through these seemingly impossible days and situations, whatever they are. At work as a therapist, at work as a physician, going home to our partners, dealing with friends. It doesn't matter. I mean, just everything. So I could be here a long time giving you the list because it's everything. So that's what we have to do. And it's a joy doing it. So I hope that's useful or at least inspiring. I'm looking at you now. So, yeah. Okay. Anybody else have a question or a comment before we stop? All right, friends. See you again in 2 weeks. Blessings.